Insurance Corporation.
15 minutes after 1 o'clock. Now, this is Jack Carney, and as I mentioned a few times earlier, perhaps you heard, I have Mrs. Shirley Temple Black on the telephone, and of all the people that I've always thought I would like to meet, I think Shirley Temple Black probably heads the list because I've had a terrible crush. I've had a terrible crush on you for a long, long time.
Let's see, you're 3 or 4 years younger than I am.
Well, our ages are almost the same. You were on the KQED auction last night.
Yes, I was. Last night I celebrated my 10th anniversary working for the auction.
You've worked for the auction now for 10 years?
That's right, and I look forward to it every year. We did pretty well last night.
How did you do?
Well, I sold my table pretty fast each time, and my husband had a table next to mine. We were slightly in competition for a while.
Oh, that's not good.
No, we enjoyed it very much. I think the blacks took over the auction for about 2 hours.
Well, now, getting before the cameras is something you don't do much anymore.
Not too often, no.
You certainly, I can't say you're inexperienced, but you're kind of out of practice. Do you ever get nervous? Really?
Well, no, I don't get nervous at the auction because we have a job to do,
Yeah.
and we have to go over our $205,000 that we raised last year at the auction.
Uh-huh.
So we have a lot of merchandise there, an awful lot to sell. It goes through Saturday night.
That's right.
It'll go way into Sunday morning, I assume.
And there are some prizes there, some, not prizes, but some items over $5,000. There's a trip to the Orient.
And Africa?
And the most beautiful silver saddle, actually leather saddle, but trimmed in silver, that I think is worth about $5,000.
I saw that last night. In fact, I touched it. Now I'll have to polish it, I guess.
Be wonderful to have, but I don't have a horse.
That's right. I'm on the board of KQED, Jack. I don't know if you know that or not.
No, I didn't know that.
I've been on it for the past year, and there are about 22 of us on the board of directors. It is supposed to be the outstanding educational channel in the country now.
Well, may I call you Shirley?
Please do, Jack.
All right. What's your feeling about television? Do you feel that that educational television is definitely the coming thing today?
Well, I certainly think there's a lot of room for it.
Yeah. Are you disappointed, as most of us are, in so many of the things on commercial television?
Well, I'm a pretty positive person, and I think there's a lot of good on television, a lot of interesting, thought-provoking shows on television. I think it's getting better. I find that in the all of the communications media, there's a lot more of the news shows, and of course on radio, the talk shows, conversation shows. And one thing the world has always needed is more communication. And at least we in the United States are certainly communicating more with each other and exchanging ideas.
Well, I would probably guess that 99% of the problems that people have, even on the basis of nations rather than individual to individual, can be traced back to some sort of a lack of communication somewhere along the line.
Right, that's right.
You know, I talked to Artie Shaw here months ago, who's in the movie business now, and I particularly wanted to talk to him about the big band days. And we talked about movies for a minute, and I said, now let's talk about the big bands. And he said, I don't want to discuss that. I hope you don't feel that way about movies and about your movie career, because I have some questions I wanted to ask you about being a child star. Would you mind?
You were a child star?
No.
No, I'll be delighted. Anything you want to talk about, Jack.
I didn't even make it as an adult. You know, I went through quite an interesting book that's a collection of things out of the Vanity Fair magazine that went out of existence some years ago, and I checked the index, and sure enough, there was a reference to Shirley Temple in there, and it was very short, but what it said was a salute to Shirley Temple, a motion picture performer at the age of 3 and a star at the age of 5. Were you actually 3 years old when you started in pictures?
That's right.
Were you a quick study? Did you learn lines easily?
Yes, I did. My mother read the lines to me at night when I was in bed, and I would know them in the morning. And I still learn things the same way. If I have a television show to learn or whatever, I work on it at night just before I go to sleep. And I think people are learning foreign languages that way and learning all kinds of information. It's not really the sleep method. I don't think I'd like to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But just before one goes to sleep, you can do all your memory work.
Well, do you still have someone read it to you, or do you read it yourself?
But this was before I could read that my mother had to do this.
Uh-huh.
After I learned to read, I taught myself.
Did you ever go to a regular school, or were you always taught right on the lot?
No, I went to a studio school. The teachers are provided by the California State Board of Education.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to studio school up to the 7th grade. And then in the 7th grade, my parents put me in Westlake School for Girls down in Los Angeles. And I graduated from Westlake way back in 1945.
Oh, that's way back.
Way back.
Were you a good student?
I was an average student. I wasn't excellent at all.
Mm-hmm.
I was a B average. And my best subjects were biology and English and history.
Mm-hmm. But as Shirley Temple, the movie star, with all the famous people that you met and all the things that you were doing, how in the world could you ever focus your attention on something as mundane as schoolwork, arithmetic and spelling and that sort of thing?
You didn't think it was interesting when you were a child?
Well, I didn't have anything else to do.
Oh, I see. Well, I loved it. It's a state law. Children in the entertainment business are required to have 3 hours of school a day.
Mm-hmm.
And, say I was making a movie called Heidi. I would be in the artificial snow at the 20th Century Fox studio 1 minute, and then I'd be back in class studying arithmetic, which I didn't like particularly and still have a little difficulty with.
You too.
Yes, I think most women do. That's really a man's specialty.
Uh-huh. Do I hear a bird in the background? Do you have a canary?
Yes, my canary sings. It's quite dark down here today, quite gloomy and overcast.
Uh-huh.
And he sings no matter what the weather is.
You're down the peninsula.
Yes, I'm in Woodside.
Uh-huh. What's the canary's name?
His name is, you're going to laugh, it's Cricket.
I did.
When he's not singing, he sounds like a cricket, that's why.
You know, I've always envied you and the very few people like you. One thing and one thing only, I think, really, and that is all of the people that that I know, that we know by name and by reputation, but people that you have gotten to meet in your exciting life. Do you know what I mean? The people that I've always seen pictures of and heard of, but the people that you have worked with in pictures, you've worked with virtually everybody, all the tremendous names in motion pictures.
Well, I was fortunate to work with many of them, that's true.
What about some of my favorites? Did you ever work with or meet W.C. Fields?
I met him once. He hated children, I hear.
Yeah.
And and of course I was a very small little girl, very short.
Uh-huh.
And most of the people I met, I got a good view of their knees. Everyone seemed quite tall to me.
Mm-hmm.
And since now I'm 5'2.5", so I'm very tall. And at 5'2.5", I get a better look at people.
But not much better. You worked with the Barrymores.
I worked just with Lionel Barrymore.
Uh-huh.
And he was quite ill when I worked with him. He had some problem with his legs.
Uh-huh.
And was in a wheelchair a good deal of the time. And they don't allow profanity on a motion picture studio soundstage when there's a minor present.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone does slip and say something he shouldn't, the studio teacher who's on the set sends you home.
Sends the minor or the person?
Sends the minor home.
I see.
And so very often I got a lot of times at home during, I don't know if it was the Little Colonel or the Littlest Rebel that I made with Lionel Barrymore, but my mother explained that he would say these odd-sounding words that I didn't understand because he was ill.
Uh-huh.
He was sick. And so I'd get to go home again, which I really didn't like. I liked my work, and I would rather have stayed at the studio and finished, but poor Lionel Barrymore did have a problem.
Did you ever work with Wallace Beery?
No, a lot of people think I did, but I never even met Wallace Beery.
Uh-huh.
I think you go back farther than I do.
I read a lot. Of all the stars that you worked with at that time, did you have any favorites? Were there any that you particularly liked?
I liked all of them.
Uh-huh.
There were two that I really liked. I don't know if your listeners are familiar with a gentleman named Jimmy Dunn.
Oh, sure.
But Jimmy Dunn, I was very, very fond of. He was very kind to me. Gary Cooper was is an outstanding memory to me.
Well, I think, Shirley, isn't it generally agreed that in the movie industry that Gary Cooper was one of the finest gentlemen ever?
He was very much admired. He was a very shy gentleman, very shy.
Mm-hmm.
And the first day I worked with him, he sent some beautiful mechanical toys over to the studio, and they were just sent anonymously. And I started playing with them, and he was sitting there behind a newspaper, and he'd slowly put it down and peek over the top of it and see if I was enjoying it. And as soon as I'd look at him, he'd pop up the newspaper again. Carol Lombard was in the same picture. I only worked with them once.
Uh-huh.
And it was a picture called Now and Forever.
As a child, how many movies did you do?
As a child, I made around 22, I believe. And then that takes me up to 13 years of age.
Mm-hmm.
And then from 13 to age 21, I made about another 8 or 9. And since then, since 1958, I've done around 50 live television shows.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to admit that I prefer, when I work, live television.
You do prefer live television?
Yes, I do.
Well, that's very interesting.
I've never done any work on the legitimate stage, but live television is just about the same, with less rehearsal time. And there's an excitement. When you do live television, you're about 10 inches off the floor, it feels. You float through it, or at least I do.
Stanley, if you joined us late, I'm talking to Shirley Temple Black. Shirley, let me ask you this, and this may be something you have no opinions on, I don't know. To my recollection, there is Jackie Cooper and Jackie Coogan and perhaps Jane Withers and yourself. There were, let's say at the most a dozen really big child stars. And Judy Garland, of course, and Mickey Rooney. And you today, everything seems to be... your life seems to be so happy and well organized, and I think you'd agree to that. But most of the child stars, most of the children who gained great fame and notoriety in pictures, as adults, seem to lead the most terrible lives and have the most terrible problems. How do you explain that? Have you any theories on the subject?
Well, there's several reasons, I believe. Number one, I have wonderful parents. I'm fortunate enough to still have them both.
Mm-hmm.
And they just recently, last New Year's Eve, had their 53rd wedding anniversary.
Good heavens.
And my father is Pennsylvania Dutch, and my mother is mostly German. And our house was nicely run, but it was... you couldn't get away with much in a Teutonic type of a home.
So they managed really to give you kind of if it's possible, a kind of a normal childhood.
Very normal. I have 2 older brothers, and we had a very normal family life. We didn't ever have a Hollywood party. I don't know what a Hollywood party really is, but we never had the people I worked with over to our house to parties. We didn't have anything against them, but we left work at the studio, and home was for our personal friends and neighbors.
So you think maybe the problems that they have today are a result of lack of parental discipline or that sort of thing while they were performing in pictures? I'm talking about the other child stars.
Well, I can't speak for anyone but myself, and of course, we all know people who have had difficulties and are having difficulties, and there are many, many reasons. I think another reason why I didn't have as much difficulty is because I started so young. I was only 3.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, do you have children?
Oh, yes.
Well, I think if particularly a child who goes into the entertainment business anywhere from 11 years of age up to, say 16 or 17 years of age, this is a difficult time in a young person's life anyway. There are lots of new things going on. And if they happen to do rather well in the entertainment business, it very often goes to their head, and they can't quite cope with it. They think they're much better than they probably really are.
Mm-hmm.
And
so you think starting that young made a big difference?
I think that makes a big difference. Yes.
Why are there no big child stars today in motion pictures or television? Have you ever thought about it? There really aren't.
Well, I don't think they make that kind of film anymore.
Uh-huh.
I don't think the films are quite geared to a child star. Heaven help us if we have another famous child star, because we'll probably have to have another depression.
The two always come together.
Well, they did when I was little. I hope it never happens like that again.
One last question. Do you ever watch television and see a Shirley Temple movie on and see yourself and cringe a little bit because you feel you were overacting a little bit or hamming? Do you ever get uncomfortable watching your own movies?
I don't watch them, so I don't really have the problem.
You've never seen one?
Oh, of course I've seen them.
Uh-huh.
And number one, I made them, you see, so I'm pretty familiar with the plot.
Mm-hmm.
And I have the films in 16 millimeter that could be shown. I'm saving them for my children's children and so forth, so they can have them if they're ever interested. You see, when you're in films as a child or at any age, and you pass these films on to your own children, it's like looking at a scrapbook where the pictures move.
Mm-hmm.
You can see Mother as she was as a child actually moving instead of just in a scrapbook picture.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope that someday they'll appreciate the old films, but we don't watch them. I think locally they come on up here on Sundays, don't they?
Yes, they do, and I know very well because my youngsters watch them. And an interesting thing to me is that these films, in as many years as it's been since they were made, have not diminished in the least in their appeal. I have a 14-year-old and a 4-year-old, and they sit there engrossed as I was, and I just have the feeling, watching them, that someday their children will do the same thing.
Well, I certainly hope so. I also wish I owned the films. I have no connection with them at all.
That must hurt.
Well, no one knew about television back in those days.
Well, Shirley, you've been very, very kind, and I thoroughly enjoyed talking to you. And I think we ought to once again mention the KQED auction because...
Yes, I hope that your listeners will tune in and start bidding on the items. I, as I said, went through the warehouse last night after I finished my shift, and I've never seen so many goodies back there. Antiques, all kinds of special items where there's maybe only one in the area like it.
Mm-hmm.
And plus a lot of very, very fine bargains.
Well, let's hope we have the best year ever at Channel 9 this year on the auction.
Well, we have to. We have to have the best year ever because we have a lot of new plans for KQED, and a new station will be built and all kinds of things. So we want it to be the best one ever.
Mm-hmm. Thank you again.
Thank you, Jack.
Hope to talk to you soon.
All righty.
Right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Mrs. Shirley Temple Black. We've run a little bit over. It's 33 minutes after 1 o'clock on KSFO Radio in San Francisco.